let's start off with Amanda and drones.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here again, even if it's virtually. So I'll be focusing on drones today. As Paul mentioned, it's mainly going to be focused on US laws, but I'll touch briefly on the EU. Drone laws and regulations vary depending upon if you're a recreational operator or a commercial operator. Recreational operator is the people you see in parks, kind of the drones you can buy just off the shelf. Of course, there are more stringent requirements for commercial operators. And for purposes of this talk, flying a drone to take and sell stock photos, to work on film production, take aerial wedding photos or videos, or to take something like real estate photos or videos means that you're governed by the requirements of commercial operators. Next slide, please. Thanks. Nope, one back. Sorry, we'll get the. Great, thanks, Paul. What is a drone and how is it used? So the definition of a drone is a remote controlled pilotless aircraft or small flying device. In the EU, it's referred to as a UAS, which means unmanned aircraft system. And drones are often equipped with a camera to record still photos and or video. And it can be used to capture images and audio video that might not be otherwise possible. So something in a remote location where there's no pass to get there, or an island, uninhabited island, there's many ways that a drone can get to places that would be difficult for people to get to otherwise. Slide 3, please. So we're going to dive into what US laws and regulations apply. If you're flying for commercial purposes, and again, for this talk, people here are mainly interested in the commercial purposes, you need to have, keep in mind 3 things: the rules, the license, and registration. So some of the rules you need to think about, deal with safety. You need to keep your drone in sight. No flying above 400 feet, over groups of people, near emergency response efforts. It's also like driving a car. You need to yield to the right of way. You need to not operate under the influence, and you must report serious accidents. In addition to maintaining these rules, you also need to get a license, and it's called a remote pilot certification. I don't have one of these, but from my research, the exam is actually quite difficult. It's more akin to becoming an airline pilot than getting a driver's license. So some of the topics that you need to be familiar with to get the remote pilot certification include airspace classification and operating requirements, aviation weather sources and effects on weather on drones, emergency procedures, airport operations, maintenance and pre-flight inspections, and much more. And that's just to get your license. In addition to complying with the rules and the license, you need to register your drone. And this is an example of where the label goes, as you see on the screen. Drone registration is valid for 3 years, but the remote pilot certificate is only valid for 2 years, and you need to retake the exam to maintain your remote pilot certificate every 2 years. There are some serious fines if you don't comply with these rules. There are civil fines up to $27,000 and criminal fines of up to $250,000 and or jail up to 3 years. Next slide, please. So in addition to the remote pilot certification, there are other laws and regulations. So each state in the US has at least one law in effect or is in the process of being passed. And these laws cover a couple different things involving drones. Laws regarding privacy, aerial trespassing, photography, and weapons. Texas has one of the most restrictive drone laws. It's chapter 423. Under Texas law, it's a crime to use drones for news gathering and other similar activity. In 2019, though, the National Press Photographers Association is challenging this rule because they're alleging it violates the First Amendment and has chilling effects on news gathering activities. This Texas law prohibits activities such as taking photos of damage from hurricanes like Hurricane Harvey or facilities housing immigrant children. This law is still going, this lawsuit is still going through, so we don't have a decision, but please keep it in mind. Under Texas law, the fine is $500 to $2,000 per image or 180 days in jail. So in addition to being mindful of your state and local laws, if you are a drone operator, please make sure you check. There's also the National Parks Policy Memorandum from June 2014. So this prohibits the launching, landing, or operation of unmanned aircraft on lands and waters administered by the National Park Service. I'm based in San Francisco, so of course I choose the Golden Gate Bridge, and that's covered. Other things to think about for the National Park Service are classic icons like Mount Rushmore, Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, and the National Mall in DC. The reason for these laws, according to the National Park Service, is for noise and nuisance reasons, park visitor safety, such as wanting to avoid crashes, destruction of property. There was one drone operator that actually attempted to land on Mount Rushmore. So that's why you have these rules when people try these things, and also harassing park wildlife. If you do violate these laws under the if you do violate the National Parks policy, it's a misdemeanor with a maximum penalty of 6 months in jail and a $5,000 fine. The other thing to think about is you cannot fly near airports. That shouldn't be surprising, but the reason is it's difficult for pilots to see these small unmanned aircrafts. And the other thing to point out is there is potentially a bipartisan law that could go into effect called the Drone Federalism Act of 2017. It is bipartisan. It has, I think, Tom Cotton and Dianne Feinstein co-sponsoring, which is not something you'd normally see co-sponsoring. So bipartisanship is possible in the stock industry. And that is a law that would establish a process for state, federal, and local governments to work together to manage the use of both recreational and commercial drones. And the FAA would be the administrator. However, this has stalled, but it is something that has been on the radar. Next slide, please. In addition to the federal, state, local laws, there's also what's called the Drone Journalism Code of Ethics. So in 2017, this code of ethics was adopted by 3 organizations: the National Press Photographers Association, the Society of Professional Journalists, and Radio and TV Digital News Association. While these code of ethics applies more to editorial content, these guidelines are applicable in certain instances to commercial content as well. I've listed some of these, as well as putting the URL to see the website where you can find all of them. Safety is the first concern. And they talk about how you need to maintain and obtain the license that I talked about earlier. Also, respecting the integrity of the photographic or video moment. So on the editorial side, drones have the potential to interrupt events, especially while hovering low. So a drone journalist should not intentionally contribute to, alter, or seek to influence events. The other thing is, especially the editorials, do not improperly enhance your content. For example, do not add natural sound unless the sound was actually captured at the same time and place as the drone video. And also you should consider how slow motion or speeding up effects may affect the editorial integrity. You also need to respect privacy. We've been talking about privacy a couple of years now at DMLA. We should all be thinking about privacy when we're, whatever content we're generating. So we need to balance the public's need for information against the potential harm or discomfort. If you wouldn't peer into over a fence or look into a window or enter private property to take that photo or video, how can you justify capturing that same image or video with a drone? So just think about it. Are you doing something that you wouldn't do because you're using a drone? Next slide, please. So there is a new UAS regulation in Europe. UAS is how Europe refers to the unmanned aircraft system, which is how they refer to drones. It replaces most of the existing domestic provisions on UAS operators in the EU member states. It was implemented in May 2019, and the governing agency is the EU Aviation Safety Agency. Even though there's going to be a general EU law, the member states will define their geographic zones where drones may not fly. So for example, natural parks, city centers, and near airports, the common sense areas where you may not want to have drones. It was originally effective as of July 1st, 2020, but like so many things, it's been pushed out due to COVID. In addition to these kind of laws and regulations I just touched on, there are some other considerations to think about using drones. You still need to get model releases and property releases for commercial use of images and video if people and property are identifiable. Doesn't change the fact that you're using a drone. It's generally okay to take photographs and videos on your own property or certain public property, not the ones we talked about, not national park, protected areas, airports, city centers. So you can take it on your own property or public property, but not on others' private property. The other thing to think about is if you're a content company like Adobe, Shutterstock, Getty, and you might get a complaint that, hey, this content was taken with the drone. That may not necessarily be true. Just because somebody thinks it's taken with a drone, don't assume that. It could be taken other ways. It could be taken via helicopter or low-flying plane, or they climbed a tree. So don't just assume it's a drone. Or even if it was taken with a drone, that person could have a license like we talked about, or they could have got permission from the National Park Service. So don't assume just because somebody says, hey, it's taken with a drone that it is, do some diligence and see. The other thing to keep in mind, if you are a content agency, ideally your in-license agreement would say that the contributor, provides content in compliance with applicable laws. So you would, check with the contributor as well, remind them of the drone laws and regulations and that they're, responsible for complying with it. And I will stop there and turn it over to my next colleague. Thank you.